Jake Martinez walked through the massive halls of the Galactic Defense Academy on planet Zarian Prime. The walls reached so high that he could barely see the ceiling. Strange alien symbols glowed softly along the corridors, lighting his path. As he made his way to the main assembly hall, he was the only human among thousands of alien cadets from across the galaxy. The other students looked at him with curious eyes. Some whispered to each other in languages he could not understand. Jake had grown used to this treatment over the past 3 years at the academy. Most aliens saw humans as a young and weak species. They thought humans had no special powers or natural weapons like the other races. To his left walked a tall, blue-skinned Altarian with 4 arms and eyes that could see in complete darkness. Behind him floated a gas-based nebular who could change shape at will. On his right, a rock like granite moved with slow but unstoppable strength. Each species had evolved special abilities that made them natural warriors. Jake looked down at his own hands. They were just normal human hands. No claws, no extra strength, no special powers. He wondered again why the Academy had accepted him into their elite program. The selection process was brutal. Only 1 in 10,000 applicants made it through the first round of tests. The assembly hall doors opened with a deep rumbling sound. Jake joined the stream of cadets flowing into the enormous chamber. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above them. Floating platforms held different alien species, each group separated by their home systems. Jake found his assigned spot in the human section, which contained only him. Commander Vextel appeared on the central stage. The massive crystalline being stood 12 feet tall, with a body that looked like living diamond. Light passed through his transparent form, creating rainbow patterns on the walls. When he spoke, his voice echoed from every surface in the room. "Cadets of the Galactic Defense Academy," Commander Vextel began. His words reached Jake both through sound and direct translation into his mind. "You have trained for 3 years. You have learned weapons, tactics, and survival skills. Today I announce your final examination." A murmur of excitement and fear rippled through the assembled students. Jake felt his heart beat faster. He had been preparing for this moment since arriving at the academy. "The final test is simple in concept but deadly in execution," the commander continued. "Each of you will face a nightmare beast in single combat. You must survive for 24 hours. Those who succeed will graduate and join the Galactic Defense Force. Those who fail will not return." Jake swallowed hard. He had heard stories about nightmare beasts from older students. These creatures were made in laboratories specifically to hunt and kill trained soldiers. They had the speed of a hunting cat, the strength of a battle tank, and intelligence that rivaled most civilized species. However, Commander Vextel raised one crystalline hand. "There are rules for this final test. You may take no weapons. No technology beyond basic survival gear. No communication devices. You will enter the testing ground with only your natural abilities and your training." The hall erupted in shocked voices. Jake heard angry shouts from the Xanthari section and worried clicks from the insect-like hive mind students. Even the usually calm Altarians seemed disturbed by this news. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Without weapons or technology, he would have to face a killing machine with nothing but his bare hands and his wits. The other species at least had natural advantages. The granite students could probably survive just by standing still and letting their rock-hard skin absorb damage. The nebular could simply become gas and avoid attacks entirely. After the assembly, Jake returned to his dormitory room. His roommate Clix was already there, pacing back and forth on his 4 legs. Xanthari was clearly upset, his usually calm demeanor replaced by nervous energy. "This is madness, Jake," Clix said, his translation device converting his clicks and whistles into human speech. "How can they expect anyone to survive without proper equipment? My people have been warriors for 10,000 years, but even we relied on weapons and armor." Jake sat on his simple bed and thought about the challenge ahead. "Maybe that's the point," he said slowly. "They want to see what we can do when we strip away all the external advantages, when all we have is what we were born with." Click stopped pacing and looked at his human friend. But Jake, what were you born with? No offense, but humans seem so fragile. You have no natural armor, no claws, no telepathic abilities. How will you survive against a creature designed to kill beings much stronger than you? Jake had been asking himself the same question. In terms of raw physical ability, he was probably the weakest student in the entire academy. His human body was soft and vulnerable compared to the armored hides and reinforced bones of his classmates. He could not fly like the aerial species, or burrow like the underground dwellers. I don't know, Jake admitted. But humans didn't become a spacefaring species by being the strongest or the fastest. We got here by being smart and adaptable. Maybe that will be enough. The next morning brought the final briefing. Commander Vextal explained the testing ground. A massive biodome containing different environments from rocky canyons to dense forests. Each student would be dropped in a random location at dawn. The nightmare beasts would be released in waves throughout the day. Remember, the commander said, survival is the only goal. You do not need to kill your beast, only live. Through the 24-hour period. Use your intelligence, use your training, use whatever advantages your species possesses. Jake looked around at his fellow students. The Altarians stood confident with their enhanced senses and multiple arms. The Granite students seemed unconcerned, trusting in their nearly indestructible bodies. Even the smaller species like the quick-moving runners appeared ready for the challenge. As the transport ships prepared to take them to the testing ground, Clix approached Jake one final time. My friend, the Zenthari said, I have watched you these 3 years. You think differently than the rest of us. Where we see problems, you see puzzles to solve. Maybe that will be your advantage. Jake nodded, trying to feel more confident than he actually was. In a few hours, he would be alone in an alien wilderness, hunted by a creature designed to kill him. He had no special powers, no natural weapons, and no backup plan, but he did have one thing that had gotten humans through countless challenges throughout their history: the ability to look at any situation and find a way to turn it to his advantage. As the transport ship lifted off toward the testing ground, Jake began to think about rocks, echoes, and the fundamental laws of physics that work the same way on every planet in the galaxy. The transport ship dropped Jake into the testing ground just as the first light of dawn painted the sky purple and orange. He landed with a soft thud on sandy ground, his knees bending to absorb the impact. The ship disappeared quickly into the morning sky, leaving him completely alone. Jake stood up and looked around at his new environment. He found himself in a deep canyon system with towering rock walls on both sides. The walls were made of reddish stone that looked like it had been carved by wind and water over millions of years. Narrow ledges and small caves dotted the cliff faces. The canyon floor was covered with loose rocks, sand, and scattered boulders. He walked forward carefully, his boots making soft crunching sounds on the gravelly ground. The canyon stretched ahead of him, winding left and right like a giant snake. Side passages branched off in different directions, creating a maze of stone corridors. Above him, the walls rose at least 200 feet high, blocking out most of the sky. Jake pulled out his basic survival gear, a water container, some emergency food packets, and a simple knife meant only for cutting plants and preparing meals. The knife would be useless against a nightmare beast, but at least he had something. He clipped the water container to his belt and put the food in his pockets. In the distance, he heard a sound that made his blood run cold. It was a roar, long and loud, echoing off canyon walls somewhere far away. Another student had met there. Beast. Jake listened carefully but heard no more sounds from that direction. He hoped that meant the student had escaped, not that the fight was already over. Jake began walking deeper into the canyon, but he was not just wandering randomly. As he moved, he studied everything around him. He noticed which rocks were loose and might fall if disturbed. He saw narrow places where the walls came close together. He found spots where the canyon floor was covered with sand that would show footprints clearly. Most importantly, Jake tested the acoustics of different areas. He clapped his hands and listened to how the sound bounced off the walls. In some places, the echo was sharp and clear. In others it was muffled or distorted. He threw small stones and paid attention to how the sound of their impact carried through the canyon system. About an hour after landing, Jake heard another roar, this one closer. Then came a sound that was definitely not human, a series of clicking and hissing noises. One of the insect-like students was fighting for their life. The sounds faded after a few minutes, leaving Jake to wonder about the outcome. Jake continued his exploration, making mental notes about everything he observed. The canyon walls were solid in most places, but some sections showed cracks and loose stones. The floor level changed constantly, with some areas higher than others. Small streams of water trickled down from above in several spots, creating muddy patches and tiny pools. As the morning progressed, Jake heard more distant sounds of combat. Sometimes there were roars from the beasts. Sometimes there were battle cries in alien languages. Occasionally, there was only silence, which was the most frightening sound of all. Jake found a place where 3 canyon passages met and decided to rest for a moment. He drank some water and ate one of his food packets while continuing to listen and observe. From this central location, he could hear sounds coming from multiple directions. He was starting to understand the layout of the canyon system. That was, when he heard it, a new sound different from all the others. It was a low, growling noise, deep and threatening. Unlike the distant roars he had been hearing, this sound was close. Very close. Jake stood up slowly and turned toward the sound. About 50 yards away, at the mouth of one of the canyon passages, something moved in the shadows. He could see a sleek shape, low to the ground, with glowing red eyes that seemed to burn in the dim light. His nightmare beast had found him. The creature stepped out of the shadows, and Jake got his first clear look at his opponent. It was built like a giant panther, but everything about it was wrong. Its body was covered in what looked like black armor plating instead of fur. Its claws were metallic and gleamed like knives. Most terrifying of all were those red eyes, which showed an intelligence that was definitely not animal. The beast was at least twice Jake's size and probably 10 times stronger. Its muscles rippled under its armored hide as it moved. Every step was perfectly silent despite its massive weight. This was a creature designed by scientists to be the perfect predator. Jake and the beast stared at each other for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Jake could feel his heart pounding in his chest. His mouth went dry and his hands began to shake slightly. Every instinct told him to run, but he forced himself to stay calm and think. The nightmare beast tilted its head slightly, studying Jake like a puzzle to be solved. Its red eyes never blinked. Jake realized that the creature was probably analyzing him, deciding on the best way to attack. The beast had fought other students and learned from each encounter. Slowly, Jake began backing away down the canyon passage behind him. He moved carefully, not wanting to trigger an attack with any sudden movements. The beast followed at the same pace, maintaining the distance between them. It seemed content to stalk him for now, perhaps waiting for Jake to make a mistake. Jake continued his careful retreat, but he was not just running away. He was leading the beast toward a specific area he had explored earlier. It was a section of the canyon where the walls came closer together and the acoustics were particularly interesting. If he was going to have any chance against this monster, he needed to choose the battlefield. The beast followed patiently, its red eyes never leaving Jake. Occasionally it would let out a low growl, just loud enough for Jake to hear. The sound sent chills down his spine every time. The creature was playing with him, letting him know that it could attack whenever it chose. As they moved deeper into the canyon system, Jake began to notice something important about his opponent. The beast's ears twitched at every small sound. When a pebble rolled down the canyon wall, the creature's head snapped toward the noise immediately. Its hearing was incredibly sensitive, probably much better than human hearing. This gave Jake an idea. If the beast relied heavily on its enhanced hearing, then maybe that could become a weakness instead of an advantage. Jake had already learned about the strange acoustic properties of different parts of the canyon. Perhaps he could use sound as a weapon, but first he needed to reach the right location. Jake continued his strategic retreat, leading the nightmare beast through a winding path toward the area he had chosen. The creature followed confidently, clearly believing that it was herding its prey into a trap. What the beast did not know was that Jake was the one setting the trap. He had spent the morning learning everything he could about this environment. Now he was going to find out if human intelligence could overcome alien-engineered killing power. The real test was about to begin, and Jake had no weapons except his mind and whatever materials the canyon could provide. Against a creature designed to kill trained warriors, it would have to be enough. Jake reached the narrow section of canyon he had been aiming for. The walls here came close together, creating a passage only about 12 feet wide. More importantly, the stone walls had a specific shape that created interesting acoustic effects. When Jake had tested this area earlier, he discovered that sounds bounced back and forth in confusing ways. The nightmare beast followed him into the narrow passage, still maintaining its patient stalking distance. Jake could hear the creature's claws clicking softly against the stone floor with each step. The sound echoed strangely in the confined space, seeming to come from multiple directions at once. Jake stopped walking and turned to face his opponent. The beast also stopped, its red eyes glowing in the dim light that filtered down from the canyon rim far above. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. Jake was trying to appear calm while his mind raced through possible strategies. The creature crouched lower, its muscles tensing. Jake could see that it was preparing to attack. There was nowhere to run in this narrow space, and the beast clearly thought it had cornered its prey. The nightmare beast opened its mouth slightly, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. That was when Jake put his first plan into action. He had filled his pockets with specific types of rocks during his morning exploration. Now he pulled out a smooth, round stone about the size of his fist. Without warning, he threw it as hard as he could at the canyon wall to his left. The rock struck the stone wall with a sharp crack that echoed loudly through the narrow passage. But because of the way the walls were shaped, the echo bounced back and forth multiple times. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, above, below, left, right, even behind the beast. The nightmare beast's head snapped toward the wall where the rock hit, then quickly turned left and right as the echoes confused its enhanced hearing. For just a moment, the creature looked uncertain. It had been designed to hunt using superior senses, but now those same senses were working against it. Jake immediately threw another rock, this time at the opposite wall. Again, the sound bounced around the narrow canyon in confusing ways. The beast spun around, trying to locate the source of the noise. Its perfect confidence was beginning to crack. While the creature was distracted, Jake began moving backward again, but now he was picking up rocks as he went. He chose them carefully. Some were good for throwing, others made interesting sounds when struck together, and a few were sharp enough to use as primitive tools. The beast realized that its prey was moving and started forward with a snarl, but Jake was ready. He struck two rocks together above his head, creating a sharp clicking sound that echoed wildly in the confined space. The beast hesitated, its ears twitching as it tried to process the confusing acoustic information. Jake continued his retreat, but now he was actively using sound as a weapon. He threw rocks at different walls, struck stones together in various patterns, and even shouted loudly to create more echoes. The narrow canyon became filled with a symphony of confusing noises, all bouncing off the walls in unpredictable ways. The nightmare beast grew more frustrated with each passing minute. It was used to hunting prey that either ran in panic or tried to fight with weapons. Jake was doing something completely different. He was turning the environment itself into a tool of confusion and misdirection. As they moved through the canyon system, Jake began implementing more complex strategies. He had noticed during his morning exploration that some rocks were balanced precariously on ledges and in cracks along the canyon walls. Now he started using those loose rocks as primitive traps. When the beast was in the right position, Jake would throw a stone at a specific spot on the canyon wall. The impact would dislodge other rocks, causing small landslides that forced the creature to dodge and change direction. None of these rockfalls were large enough to seriously injure the beast, but they disrupted its stalking pattern and kept it off balance. The creature began to realize that this human was not behaving like normal prey. Most beings faced with a nightmare beast either froze in terror or tried to run away quickly. Jake was doing neither. He was leading the beast through a carefully planned route. Using the terrain against it, the beast decided to end this game. With a loud roar that echoed through the canyon like thunder, it charged forward at full speed. Its metallic claws sparked against the stone floor as it ran. Jake had only seconds before those claws would tear him apart, but Jake had been preparing for this moment. As the beast charged, he grabbed a handful of sand from the canyon floor and threw it directly into the creature's face. The sand did not hurt the armored predator, but it did something more valuable. It forced the beast to close its eyes for a split second and shake its head. In that brief moment of blindness, Jake dove to the side and pressed himself against the canyon wall. The beast charged past him, unable to stop its momentum in time. It crashed into a large boulder at the end of the passage, sending echoes booming through the canyon system. The nightmare beast turned around quickly, snarling with rage. A thin line of dark liquid ran from a small cut on its armored snout where it had hit the boulder. It was the first time the creature had been injured, even slightly, and it was furious. Jake realized that his hit-and-run tactics were working, but he needed to be more aggressive. The beast was learning from each encounter, and soon it would adapt to his acoustic tricks. He needed to find a way to turn the creature's own strength and speed against it. As the beast stalked toward him again, Jake noticed something important. The creature's enhanced hearing was so sensitive that loud, sudden noises actually seemed to cause it pain. When he had struck the rocks together, the beast had not just looked confused, it had flinched slightly as if the sound hurt its ears. This gave Jake a new idea. Instead of just using echoes to confuse the creature, maybe he could use sound as an actual weapon. He began looking for rocks with specific acoustic properties, stones that would create sharp, painful sounds when struck together. The beast crouched for another charge, but this time Jake was ready with a different strategy. He had learned something crucial about his opponent. It was intelligent and adaptable, but it was also proud and aggressive. Those traits could be turned into weaknesses if he played the situation correctly. Jake began backing away again, but now he was making noise constantly. He struck rocks together, threw stones at walls, and shouted challenges at the beast. To an outside observer, it might have looked like panic, but Jake was actually implementing a carefully planned acoustic assault. The canyon filled with a continuous barrage of sharp sounds, all echoing and multiplying in the confined space. The beast's ears flattened against its head, and Jake could see that the creature was in real discomfort now. Its enhanced hearing, designed to give it an advantage in hunting, had become a liability, but the nightmare beast was not stupid. It began to understand what Jake was doing, and it started looking for ways to counter the human's tactics. The real battle of wits was just beginning, and both hunter and prey were learning that this contest would not be won by strength or speed alone. As the day wore on, Jake's tactics became more sophisticated. He had discovered that certain combinations of rocks created sounds that seemed to cause the nightmare beast real pain. The creature's enhanced hearing, which should have been its greatest advantage, was becoming its weakness. Jake found a section of the canyon where the walls had an unusual curved shape. When he tested different sounds here, he discovered something remarkable. The curved walls acted like acoustic mirrors, focusing and amplifying sound waves. A simple hand clap in the right spot became a sharp crack loud enough to make his own ears ring. The beast followed him into this acoustic arena, still confident in its superior strength and speed. But Jake had spent precious time learning the exact properties of this space. He knew where to stand to make the loudest sounds and where the echoes would be most confusing. Jake picked up two specific rocks he had identified earlier. They were made of a hard, crystalline material that created an extremely sharp, high-pitched sound when struck together. He positioned himself at the focal point of the curved canyon walls and brought the rocks together with all his strength. The sound that resulted was like a knife cutting through the air. It echoed off the curved walls, amplified and focused into an acoustic weapon that hit the beast like a physical blow. The nightmare beast actually staggered backward, shaking its head in pain and confusion. Jake struck the rocks together again and again. Each impact created another wave of amplified sound that bounced around the canyon like invisible lightning. The beast tried to approach him but was driven back by the acoustic assault. For the first time since the hunt began, Jake was the one in control, but the nightmare beast was learning. After several minutes of acoustic torture, it began to adapt. The creature flattened its ears against its head and started moving in a low crouch, reducing its exposure to the worst of the sound waves. It was finding ways to function despite the pain. Jake realized he needed to change his strategy again. The acoustic weapon was working, but only temporarily. The beast's intelligence and adaptability meant that any single tactic would eventually be countered. He needed to stay ahead of the creature's learning curve. Jake began moving toward another section of the canyon that he had explored that morning. This area had different acoustic properties, but it also had something else: unstable rock formations that could be triggered to create much larger landslides than the small ones he had been using. As he led the beast toward this new battlefield, Jake continued his acoustic harassment. But now he varied the sounds constantly, never giving the creature time to fully adapt to any single frequency or pattern. He struck different types of rocks together, threw stones at various angles, and used his voice to create echoes that seemed to come from impossible directions. The beast followed, but Jake could see that it was becoming more cautious. The easy confidence it had shown at the beginning of the hunt was gone. Now it moved carefully, constantly turning its head to track the sources of confusing sounds. The predator was starting to behave more like prey. Jake reached the area he had been aiming for, a section where the canyon wall had a massive crack running up its face. Loose rocks and boulders were wedged in the crack, held in place by nothing more than friction and gravity. Jake had noticed this natural trap during his morning reconnaissance and had been saving it. For the right moment, the trick would be positioning the beast in exactly the right spot, and then triggering the rockslide with precise timing. If Jake miscalculated, he would bring tons of stone down on himself instead of his opponent. Jake began the delicate process of maneuvering the beast into position. He used sound to guide the creature's movements, creating distracting echoes that made it turn and move in specific directions. It was like conducting a deadly orchestra, with rocks and echoes as his instruments and the beast as his unwilling dance partner. The nightmare beast seemed to sense that something was different about this area. It moved more slowly, testing each step. Its red eyes constantly scanned the canyon walls above, looking for threats. The creature's survival instincts were warning it of danger, but it could not identify the exact source. Jake positioned himself across from the cracked canyon wall, with the beast between him and the unstable rocks. Now came the most dangerous part of his plan. He needed to create a sound loud enough and sudden enough to trigger the landslide, but he had to do it without warning the beast in advance. Jake had saved his loudest acoustic weapon for this moment. Earlier in the day, he had found a special rock formation, two large stones that had fallen in such a way that they created a natural amplification chamber. When struck correctly, they would produce a sound like thunder. The beast was almost in the perfect position. Jake could see the stress fractures in the canyon wall above it, marking where the rocks would fall. He raised a heavy stone above his head, preparing to strike the acoustic trigger, but the nightmare beast chose that moment to charge. Perhaps it had finally figured out Jake's pattern, or maybe it simply grew tired of the acoustic torture. Either way, it launched itself forward with a roar of rage, its metallic claws extended and ready to tear Jake apart. Jake had no choice but to strike the rocks immediately, even though the beast was not quite in the optimal position. The thunderous sound echoed through the canyon like an explosion. Above them, the cracked canyon wall shuddered and began to collapse. Tons of stone tumbled down in a deafening avalanche. The beast tried to change direction in mid-charge, but its momentum carried it forward into the path of falling rocks. A boulder the size of a small car struck the creature's shoulder, spinning it around and sending it crashing into the canyon wall. For a moment, Jake thought his trap had succeeded completely. The beast lay motionless under a pile of rubble, and the canyon was filled with the settling dust of the landslide. But then he saw movement among the fallen stones. The nightmare beast was still alive. Its armored hide had protected it from the worst of the impact, though Jake could see that it was injured. Dark liquid oozed from several cuts on its body, and it moved more slowly than before. One of its legs seemed to be hurt, causing it to limp slightly, but the creature was far from defeated. If anything, the injury had made it more dangerous. Its red eyes now glowed with pure hatred, and Jake could see that all pretense of playing with its prey was gone. The beast wanted to kill him now, and it would use every bit of its remaining strength to do so. Jake realized that his hit-and-run tactics had worked up to a point, but now he needed a final strategy. The beast was wounded but still deadly, and it had learned too much about his methods. The acoustic tricks that had worked before were no longer surprising it. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows through the canyon. Jake had survived most of the 24-hour test period, but the final hours might be the most dangerous. Wounded predators were often the most vicious, and this one had been specifically designed to never give up. Jake began moving toward the deepest part of the canyon system, an area he had not yet explored fully. If he was going to survive the final confrontation with his increasingly desperate opponent, he would need to find new advantages in terrain he had not yet mastered. The real test of human adaptability was about to begin. Jake moved deeper into the canyon system as darkness began to fall. The wounded nightmare beast followed him, limping but determined. The creature had learned from every encounter during their long battle, and Jake knew that his previous tactics would no longer work. He needed something completely new for this final confrontation. The deepest part of the canyon was different from the areas Jake had explored earlier. Here, the walls came together to form a narrow gorge with only one way in or out. The stone walls were smoother, carved by ancient water flows, and they rose so high that only a thin strip of sky was visible far above. Jake studied this natural trap as he entered it. The gorge was dangerous because there was no escape route, but it also had unique acoustic properties that might work in his favor. The smooth walls and narrow space would focus sound waves even more intensely than the areas he had used before. As Jake reached the end of the gorge, he turned to face his opponent. The beast appeared at the entrance, its red eyes glowing in the gathering darkness. Both hunter and prey were exhausted from their long battle. Jake's throat was dry and his hands were scraped from handling rough stones all day. The beast's injuries had slowed it down, but its hatred burned as bright as ever. For a moment, they simply stared at each other across the narrow gorge. Jake could hear the creature's labored breathing echoing off the walls. He could see the intelligence in its eyes as it evaluated this final battlefield. The beast knew this was a trap, but it also knew that Jake had nowhere left to run. Jake had one last plan, but it was the most dangerous thing he had attempted all day. During his brief exploration of the gorge, he had discovered something remarkable about its acoustic properties. The smooth walls and precise dimensions created a resonance chamber that could amplify specific sound frequencies to incredible levels, but to make his plan work, Jake would need to create exactly the right sound at exactly the right moment. He had found the perfect rocks for the job, two pieces of the same crystalline material that would create a pure, high-pitched tone when struck together. If he could hit the resonant frequency of the gorge, the sound would be amplified beyond anything he had achieved before. The beast began stalking forward, moving slowly but steadily down the narrow gorge. There was no rush now. Both predator and prey knew this was the final confrontation. The creature's claws clicked against the stone floor with each step, the sound echoing ominously in the confined space. Jake waited until the beast was halfway down the gorge, positioned exactly where the acoustic effect would be strongest. Then he raised the two crystalline rocks above his head and brought them together with every bit of strength he had left. The sound that resulted was unlike anything Jake had ever heard. It started as a sharp, pure tone, but the gorge's resonance properties grabbed that sound and amplified it beyond all reason. The noise became a physical force that seemed to shake the very stones of the canyon walls. The effect on the nightmare beast was immediate and devastating. The creature's enhanced hearing, already stressed by hours of acoustic assault, could not handle this level of sound intensity. The beast collapsed to its knees, shaking its head frantically and clawing at its own ears. But Jake was not finished. He struck the rocks together again and again, each impact creating another wave of resonant sound that filled the gorge like a weapon made of pure noise. The smooth walls reflected and amplified every sound wave, creating a feedback loop that grew stronger with each repetition. The beast tried to retreat, but the acoustic assault had damaged its balance and coordination. It stumbled and fell, rolling onto its side as the unbearable sound continued to assault its hypersensitive hearing. For the first time since the hunt began, the predator was completely helpless. Jake could have continued the acoustic torture until the beast was permanently disabled, but he had a better idea. Instead of destroying his opponent, he was going to capture it. During his exploration of the gorge, he had noticed something that gave him an opportunity for a truly elegant solution. Near the end of the gorge, water erosion had carved a narrow crevice in the canyon floor. The opening was just wide enough for the beast to fall into, but too narrow for it to climb out. If Jake could maneuver the disoriented creature into that natural prison, he would win the contest without having to kill his opponent. Jake stopped the acoustic assault and quickly moved to put his final plan into action. The sudden silence was almost as shocking as the noise had been. The beast lay on the canyon floor, still shaking its head and struggling to regain its senses. Jake began making different sounds now, not the painful high-frequency tones, but carefully chosen noises, designed to drive the beast in a specific direction. He threw rocks to create distracting impacts, used his voice to create echoes that seemed to come from the gorge entrance, and struck stones together in patterns that encouraged the creature to move away from the sounds, still disoriented from the acoustic attack. The beast responded instinctively to these directional cues. It stumbled toward what it thought was safety, trying to escape the source of the terrible sounds. Jake guided its movements like a shepherd herding a dangerous animal, using sound to push the creature exactly where he wanted it to go. The nightmare beast stepped directly onto the narrow stone bridge that covered the hidden crevice. Jake had positioned himself to drive the creature to this exact spot, and now he implemented the final part of his plan. Jake struck his crystalline rocks together one more time, but this time he aimed the sound at a specific weak point in the stone bridge. The resonant frequency hit the already stressed rock at precisely the right angle. With a sharp crack, the stone bridge collapsed under the beast's weight. The nightmare beast fell into the narrow crevice with a roar of surprise and anger. The opening was deep enough to prevent escape, but not deep enough to cause serious injury. The creature found itself trapped in a natural prison, alive and relatively unharmed, but completely unable to continue the hunt. Jake approached the edge of a crevice carefully and looked down at his opponent. The beast glared up at him with its red eyes, still radiating hatred but no longer able to act on it. The most dangerous predator in the galaxy had been defeated by rocks, echoes, and creative thinking. As the hours passed and the test period neared its end, Jake sat beside the crevice and shared his water with the trapped beast. The creature was no longer his enemy, just another being caught in the Academy's brutal examination system. Jake had proven his point. Humans might not have natural weapons or armor, but they had something equally valuable. When the Academy's retrieval teams arrived at dawn, they found an unprecedented scene. Most successful candidates had either killed their beasts or barely survived by hiding until time ran out. Jake had captured his opponent alive and was calmly waiting beside his makeshift prison. Commander Vextal himself came to investigate this unusual result. The crystalline being studied the trapped nightmare beast and the evidence of Jake's acoustic warfare scattered throughout the gorge. After a long examination, the commander turned to Jake with what might have been approval in his alien features. "Cadet Martinez," Commander Vextal said, "you have demonstrated something remarkable today. While other species relied on their natural advantages, you succeeded through pure intellectual adaptation. You turned a hostile environment into your ally and used your opponent's strengths against it. Jake stood and saluted in the human military fashion. Sir, I just used what I had available. Humans have always been good at making tools out of whatever we find around us. The commander's form shimmered with internal light, a sign of deep thought among his people. Indeed, your performance today will become a case study at this academy. You have shown why humans, despite their apparent physical limitations, deserve their place among the stars. As the retrieval teams carefully extracted the nightmare beast from its prison, Jake looked up at the narrow strip of sky visible above. The gorge. He had survived the test, but more importantly, he had proven that human creativity and adaptability could overcome any challenge. The galaxy was full of species with natural weapons, enhanced senses, and incredible physical abilities. But humans had something that could not be engineered in a laboratory or evolved through natural selection: the ability to look at any situation and find a way to turn it to their advantage. Jake Martinez graduated at the top of his class, and his methods became required study for all future academy cadets. His victory proved that sometimes the most primitive tools, when used with sufficient creativity and determination, could defeat the most advanced technology. The legend of the human who defeated a nightmare beast with nothing but rocks and echoes spread throughout the Galactic Defense Force, earning humanity a new level of respect among the stars.